Here is an entire keynote on changing B2B buying behavior, all captured in roughly 3 minutes. You know, if I think back across the last 5 years and all the research that I've been involved in, both at Gartner and CEB, and now, of course, at Ecosystems, if there's one thing that is definitively clear in all of that work, it is that the number one thing that we can, in fact, should solve for today in order to increase the likelihood of a customer buying a high-quality, low-regret deal. So that's the bigger deal with the broader scope, the higher price point, where they also feel good about it at the same time. If we want to increase the likelihood of that happening, the number one thing that we need to solve for is customer confidence. But it's not customers' confidence in us, the supplier, our brand, our product, or us as a sales professional or a success professional. It's actually customers' confidence in themselves and their ability to make large-scale decisions on behalf of their company. Have we asked the right questions? Have we looked at the right information? Are we even agreed? How confident are we that we even agree on the right problem and that this is the best solution? And if customers aren't confident in those kinds of dimensions of the purchase process or even of the decision process, they're ultimately going to choose not to choose. They're going to either embrace status quo, even if they want to change, or they're going to change in a very measured way and buy something very small. Now, why does all this matter? Well, I think we'd all agree that we live in a time of deep uncertainty. In fact, it's an unending arc of uncertainty that we can trace back certainly over the last 3 years, whether it's the global pandemic and the Great Resignation and supply chain interruptions, and now potentially heading into a global recession. But I think the thing that's most interesting and important about all of this work on customer confidence is that the single biggest forces that are really eroding customer confidence today aren't these sort of temporary disruptions, economic disruptions, or supply chain disruptions. There's actually, I would argue, 4 significant forces that are eroding customer confidence on an ongoing basis that are both a problem for us trying to build customer confidence, but also an opportunity. And those 4 forces are these. The first one is decision complexity. The second is information overload. The third is implementation uncertainty. And the fourth is what I would call value opacity. That is where the value is unclear. It is opaque. And for each one of these, there's a story to tell. The decision complexity idea is the fact that B2B buying decisions have become increasingly complex as more and more stakeholders have gotten involved in that purchase decision with competing priorities, competing metrics. I've talked about that in other videos as well. There's information overload, which I talked about in the HBR article, Sense Making for Sales, where it's not just that customers struggle with a high quantity of information, but they struggle with high quantities of high quality information. So you're telling me to zig, they're telling me to zag, everybody's got data, everybody's got research, but now I don't know what to do. So I just research it more and just wind up even more confused. I call this the smartness arms race. And it turns out the smartness arms race has ended in a tie, and the only one to lose it was your customer. The third one is implementation uncertainty. My friend over at Gartner, Hank Barnes, has done a huge amount of work around customer confidence and the degree to which implementation uncertainty can deeply undermine customers' confidence in their ability to actually, implement that solution, and actually increases their regret for whatever they buy. And it's very interesting because much of that problem isn't really about about the supplier, but about customers' own inability to implement that solution effectively, but their failure to implement carries over to your solution. And finally is value opacity, something we study all the time at Ecosystems, which is this idea that there are these dimensions of what we call a value gap between value promised and value delivered. Or value realized. There's also gaps in sort of the different stakeholders and what they consider to be valuable in the first place, because they haven't fully agreed on what are we trying to do and how will we know when we get there. All right, so how do we put all this together? Because this is the world we live in, right? So that we live in a world where decision complexity, information overload, implementation uncertainty, value opacity are all undermining customers' confidence in their ability to make large-scale decisions on behalf of their company, the number one driver of increasing the likelihood of that deal actually happening. Well, if you think about it from our perspective on the sales or the supplier side, I think the story here is actually quite interesting. In fact, it's actually quite exciting because, in fact, we don't necessarily just have to be a taker on this situation. We can actually be a maker. And what I mean by that is we can take this lack of confidence and turn it into an opportunity for us to really set ourselves apart in the marketplace, both individually and as an organization, by actually becoming a source of confidence creation for our customers. And the way I think about it today is it's actually so different than when Challenger originally came out 10 years ago. Challenger And I still stand by that work, but Challenger is all about, providing your customers frame-breaking insights that change the way they think, not about you, but that change the way they think about their own business, new way to make money, save money, mitigate risk, and in ways they haven't fully appreciated. And I think that's still a critically important aspect of selling effectively. But I think about the single biggest opportunity to truly set yourselves apart today, however, it's probably less about frame breaking and more about what I would call frame making. I think our opportunity today is to really play the role of creating frameworks for our customers, a framework around decision making, or a framework around buying, if you will, a framework around information, a framework around implementation, and a framework around value to help them organize and analyze and prioritize their thinking. How do we buy? Who should we pull in? And in what order? How do we get them on board? Which information matters? How do we organize that information? Which questions do we need to ask ourselves and ultimately answer as we consume that information? What are the very specific steps of implementation? In what order? How do we know when we get there? And what are the dimensions of value that will truly tell us whether or not we're succeeding? And how do we measure those? So if we can build a framework for decision making, for information, for implementation, for value, and play this role of frame maker and not just frame breaker, I think that's the way that you set yourself apart today, not just because you're approaching your customers differently, but because also you're solving for the number one thing that I think customers crave today, which is their belief not in you, but their belief in themselves and their ability to make large-scale decisions on behalf of their company. And I think if you're looking to stand out, that's the way to do it today.